And you might repeat the question.
Oh, that's true. I guess this is, might as well start now. I was actually hoping the provost would show up because he is very much interested in data and open data coming from the Census Bureau. And so he's a good person to actually have insights on this as well. But my name is Jennifer Boettcher. I'm the business reference librarian. So I'm just stating my bias right now that I am a business librarian. And so if there's other science stuff, we have science librarians here who can help us. What will be covered today is basically talking about who I am and why I do have some authority for being here. The stuff that's in the data, open data, and we are talking about data sets. We are talking about the actual numbers, not concepts, not text data, mining and things like that. If you want to do that, there are other programs and we can talk about them afterwards, and other tutorials and workshops and everything else. We could talk about that later. I have been a business librarian. Can we get rid of this? I have been a business librarian for quite a few years. I've actually written a book, co-authored a book called Industry Research Using the Economic Census. And one of those things is I'm also widely written on the North American Industry Classification Systems, which are basically the way you classify establishments in the United States. So and then also the Census of Governments, I've lectured on that, as well as I have a very strong interest in public finance. So those boring topics will not appear too much in this topic, but if anybody has also an interest in that, let me know and we can talk about exciting opportunities for you. As a librarian, I understand the sources, I know where to find the sources, I can do everything that you see here as a librarian. But as a librarian, I don't actually create the data. I don't publish the data. I don't interpret the data. I don't do data entry. Some faculty want us to do that. And these are my views and not that of Georgetown. There's a lot of experts in this campus, and we could refer you to some of them in addition to what I have to offer. But let's say you're here because you're interested in this subject. There are jobs out there for you. If you are a data person and you're not intimidated by data, either because of the analysis of it, or by the creation of it, by the repository of it, by interpreting it, by using it for storytelling, any of those things actually are jobs and job titles that you can use. So just realize that this skill set may just be the beginning of your next career. We are going to be talking about data, as the bottom level says, that lead to information, that leads to knowledge, and then decision making. The big thing about the data is that it's the key word now in the parlance of the day is evidence-based. When you are doing evidence-based research, you have to start with a good data and a good data set. And so therefore, that's why we are talking about data today. Even though you want to be a decision maker and you want to, share your insights and everything else, make sure that it is based upon data. Now, data is kind of weird. Unlike text of things like this slide here is protected by copyright because it is in a fixed format. Data is a concept. Data are facts. And those things in the U.S. in the U.S. government cannot be copyrighted. In some other places in Europe, actually, data can be copyrighted. But just the datum itself cannot be copyrighted. But a creative expression of that data is copyrightable. So if you have a table, if you have a visualization, or anything else in an original concept of arranging that data, that is copyrightable. Now, copyright means that you have to seek permission to publish it outside of your university. Being able to cite it, though, that's an ethical thing. Copyright is legal. but citing is ethical. So even though the data in you may or may not be copyrightable, make sure you always cite your data. So I just want to talk about that. Now, other things we should all have a common understanding about is the vocabulary that we have here. Data sets are sometimes raw or statistical numbers. And what I mean raw is by saying how many people are here. And then statistical is what's the average size of events, right? So it could be really small amount of number, but more and more we're talking about big numbers that end up in CSV or Excel. Metadata are those things that talk about what is that data all about. And when we get into bigger data sets, and when the term metadata comes about, look for something that's called a code book, because that code book will talk about how is that defined, what are the limitations, how is it collected, what are the parameters around that data. So always look for a code book if it's not very clear about that. Everybody's talking about big data. Actually, big data is actually waning, I think, a little bit. Let's hope. Raw data is basically transactional or operational data. It's not very well structured, and you can get a job just structuring raw data and so that you can analyze it into reports or into statistical analysis. So, like in the library, the number of checkouts or the checkout, every day, every hour, this check out. But the reports is the end of the day, how many folks were checked out, how many cameras were checked out. That statistical analysis is put into a report, and some of those reports actually have some analysis. Has it increased? Has it decreased? When somebody says, tell me about this data, and all you see is a number, what you do is you look at one column and you look at the other column and you say, this has decreased. And then all of a sudden you're brilliant. So if you're ever confronted with analyzing data, that's all it is. You're looking at trends. Is it increasing? Is it decreasing? Is there more of this than there are of that? So that's what you have to do. Now, the visualization is something that actually we teach here at Georgetown as well in the library. It's a free service for Georgetown students, current students, so that you can put this mnemonic information and these numbers into so that people can understand, because everybody in this room probably knows how to read a table, but some people can't see, is it bigger or smaller? They have to see it in context, and that's what data visualization is doing. Open data. We're here because you want to know more about open data. Open data is accessible, created for a specific person, and reproducible or going to be reproduced. Even this definition is something like 5 years old now, but it still fits because that concept of open data, that it is accessible as a whole, that it could be reproducible, that it could be downloadable, it could be put in with combined with other data and constructed, and so you can present it in the way you want to present it. Open data is a lot of times you see open data as a license. Why is there open data? Why do people give away this data? Why are you getting access to all this open data? Because believe me, there's a lot of proprietary data out there too. Basically, open data is funded by research created for a specific purpose. You're going to have problems with that, right? What if you're looking at children below the age of 5 and your data set is 7 and below? You're going to have problems with that. But the United States is leaning towards more open data. There are a lot of countries that are recognized as open data, and that link will actually link you to where all the countries have an open data policy. NGOs, World Bank, UN, they are now opening their data. Even OECD is opening up some of their data. So that's all available to you. Things that are funded by grants will have open data, but that data set is usually bound by the dates of that grant. So they did a great job and they have just the statistics you want, but they're really old, or maybe 5 years old or something like that. You will also find open data, and a lot of publishers are actually requiring, if you're doing research and you're submitting your article and it is data or evidence-based, that data will actually have to be made available to the people of the subscribers of that article. That really doesn't make it open data because you have to subscribe to the journal, but sometimes it is open. Remember that this data is collected as a byproduct for research and used in decision making. So therefore, the people who are trying to make their decisions are the people collecting the data, and you're just seeing what that data is available. You may not be needing it for the same reason. Fair use and licensing restrictions apply to open data. In the US federal government, a broader picture, the data is out there as a broader picture. It is not open data, it is public domain, which means you have it available and you don't even have to cite it. Public domains, you don't even have to give credit. It would be nice, it would be ethical if you gave credit, because if you didn't collect the data, how are you going to get, you don't want to be blamed if the data is wrong, right? So you're covering your ass by citing data. But you'll see an awful lot of information out there in the public domain, and that means it came from the federal government or these specific states, or sometimes agencies within those states, so that you could get to all of this big data, all of this open data or public domain data through a variety of sources. Even though it's government data, you may not be able to find it. You say, oh, it should be there because it's government data and it's public domain. I insist on having it. Well, if you have personal identification, personal identifiable information, PII, if you have PII collected in that data source, you will not get that. And some prime examples is the HIPAA. You've heard of HIPAA, which means that even though that data is filled out by forms and you have that information, you submit it, they cannot use that information, which includes your name, to the statistical analysis. But also here in Georgetown is something more relevant, which is FERPA. So if you're concerned about privacy as a student, look into the FERPA rules and look to say, how does that relate to me here at Georgetown? And like I had told the security studies person, that you may not get data because of general military or intelligence, if it's intelligence related. It is really, really hard to get how many people are in the armed forces. It's really hard to say where are they based. And when you think about it, that makes sense, that you don't want to give that. Sometimes federal government data is collected from proprietary sources and you have to pay. There is also some agencies that still have under a cost recovery mandate, and you have to pay them a little bit of money to get in. But sometimes you can get around it by calling them, telling them you're a student, telling them what the usage. So if you're ever confronted with paying for data, contact the library and we can help you figure out ways if maybe we can get it another way. Contracts, if it's, I'm not going to be talking about contracts, which is very similar to licensing issues, that this data is collected, but they're not allowed to distribute it. Now, in the federal government contracts, they should clearly state it is available. But in the future, I'm wondering if collection is being done more and more, not by federal agencies, but by private contractors. Are they going to write it in their contracts that data, at least that data will belong to the government or that contracting agency? And that's something that if anybody, I was surprised I don't have anybody in here from the public policy school. That is an issue that you might want to address. And I would be happy to work with you on that. Okay, what is the situation? I would say 2 years ago, this is all true. This is the past of what statistical data collection in the United States was like. That there is no one statistical agency. They're looking at maybe changing that. The reason why is because would you tell the IRS your income? And then would you tell if the Census Bureau asked you your income, you would be taxed on your income here, but if you were telling the Census Bureau, you want it to be as true as possible. And then what do you mean by income? Is it before, is it after the benefits, all of this other stuff? So there is no one source statistical office. Everybody else in the world, and you want to, France, everybody in the world has a single statistical office, but the United States. Pain in the neck that can be, but there's a lot of reasons why it's different. But the big thing here is to look at the policies, priorities. If the Congress required the data be collected, then, or distributed, then it will be done, definitely. Congress trumps everything. Then the Federal Register, if it's a regulation, then it can be done, but Congress can trump regulations. I'm sorry for using that word, trump. It oversees or overcomes. I need to think of a better word than that now these days. Then there's memorandum. The president can sign a memorandum about should this data be collected or how is it collected. But if there's a regulation that overrides it, then the regulation stands. And then there's the agencies. The agencies always collected the data that way. So therefore it's collected that way, but it can be overran by any of these other things. So just realize if you're looking at an agency data set and then all of a sudden it changes, it could be for a variety of reasons. But also realize that if you really want to make change and if you want that to hold true, have it try to go through your congressional member and have a law or support a law. There's a law out there right now that I really would like everybody to support called the Open Government Data Act. That you can call your representative and say, please support that. And then that way it can't be changed by administrations, by the administrations. So the OMB is still in charge of the methodology, the funding, all of these things. So a lot of things are going through the OMB before other agencies actually collect the statistics. They have oversight of paperwork and statistical gathering, but they don't, they have not in the past been responsible for the actual data collection. Some of that is changing. Some of you may have heard that the OMB is dictating census, what they can ask and what they shouldn't ask. And that is usually have been done by the agency or by regulations. Actually, the census form is put forward through regulations. Now, what is going on now? The head of the OMB is Mick Maloney. Does anybody have some insight about him? He's a Georgetown alum.
Oh, I didn't know that.
But you also know that he was one of the founders of the Freedom Caucus.
Mm-hmm.
And if you remember a couple of years ago, the Freedom Caucus was very anti-government and very, let's defund the government. And so that person's in charge of the statistical agencies right now, which means there could be some concern. We do have a friend, a statistical friend, a data friend in Nancy Pollock, who is the chief statistician of the United States, which advises the OMB head. And she works with the statistical and science branch officer in the Office of Information Regulatory Affairs in OMB. So that's the hierarchy. She's the person who really is trying to influence statistical policy. However, she has not been very active in the press and making statements and things like that. I wish I'd seen more of it. But the Sunlight Foundation, which is not affiliated with any government agency, but the Sunlight Foundation is very supportive of data gathering and information distribution, basically believes that the civil servants who work in those agencies want to continue doing this, want to keep on doing this. So we've talked, next section, we will be talking about the data itself and getting into the data and how to find the data. But I wanted everybody to understand how this data is gathered. Why is it available? How can, how can I influence that? And what's happening when you lose access to that data? Why could this have been? So at this point, do we have any questions about the data gathering or priorities or what open data is and the differences between open data and public domain, or that pyramid about data, information, data and information, and then something knowledge. Yeah. Let's go back to that just for fun. I love that. I'm a librarian, what can I say? I love that graphic. Come on. Knowledge, that's it. Knowledge. Because there's a lot of people who have this knowledge and then they just make assumptions. So they just start making assumptions and you're saying, how do they know that? It's because they've had experience with the data. And if they see one bit of data thing, they make all of these assumptions because they know that data is related to the information and they know how that information all relates. So when your professor says something and you go, how do you know that? Ask them, how do you know that? What data source? If I wanted to understand that, how you came to that assumption, ask them, how did you get there? Because that's very important, especially since we have such contact with such very knowledgeable people. They may not know the numbers, but they understand what's going on because they've had the experience with the evidence. So I'm going to be quiet for a couple minutes. And I should have asked my peers to pepper the questions. Do you guys have any questions? Oh, good. I got a question.
So you explained the hierarchy within the federal government and kind of the process there, but you also mentioned in one slide a number of states that have open data sources. So could you share any info on?
I think you just passed it, Jennifer.
I know it probably differs by state, but
it does differ by state. We have, the United States is created by 50 different countries that all have their own policies. And there's some things that are regulated on a national level, like military spending, block grants, things like that. But to tell you the truth, most of the things that affect families, most of the things that affect towns are actually done at the state level. And every state may do it a little bit differently. There's 50 different experiments going on at once.
Right.
And so some of this data and exploration and how they did it and why they did it and what were the results are public information out there, and they're public domain, and they expose all of that. I don't know the bad states, but these are the good states.
And what makes them good? Is it
because they have the public domain laws on their books, usually within the state laws or regulatory.
Does that usually wind up looking like sort of administrative records that are stripped of personally identifying information?
Right, exactly. The administrative records are actually a source of big data.
Yeah.
And so they strip out the information about the individuals. And so they say, women in this town between this age that have this many children have used SNAP this many times.
Right.
Now, there is that question of privacy. If you have a small town and there's only so many women in there of that age with that many children, they may take that data out. But then you just go to the higher statistical level or the higher geographic level, and then that way that data will probably be brought back in. So there may be a number, but with a whole bunch of D's or an asterisk. But then if you go up, you could usually see more numbers about that category. And that, what's nice is that, when you're talking about a table, it's 2 dimensions, right?
Yeah.
You have your rows and your columns. The great things about open data is that you may have 5 or 6 different dimensions. So you could filter on some of these things and really bring it down. But because of that filtering makes it so much easier, these people who want to protect anonymity actually takes more data out. So it's sometimes you'll see more at an older level or an older time period than what you see now. Other questions? Yeah.
I thought it was interesting that you said that there is no federal agency which makes a homogeneous, standardized, database of things. Sure enough, that's fine, I guess. But my question is, when you have statistics from so many different federal offices, do you have an institution or a guideline which standardizes the methodologies of data gathering? Because usually when you're doing meta-analysis, when you're trying to do that, the biggest problem is you have huge data sets, but the data has been gathered differently. You have convenience samples, you have other types of samples. And so, for example, in health, you have Cochrane Review for systematic reviews, you have Prisma guidelines. So is there like a source for a standardized methodology?
With the OMB, because the OMB does have to review methodology, but they're usually reviewing methodology for purposes of privacy. How are you planning to keep that private? How are you planning these questions that you're asking? How intrusive are they? How many questions are you asking? Are you just asking too much detail? Things like that. That's the methodology they're looking at. They're not looking at standardizing. What do you mean by income? Even the question of age. What do you mean by age of the date of the collection or of your last birthday? Or is your birthday that's closest, the age that you will be at the closest point in this time? Even a simple question like that, it varies. And so that's one of the issues that actually they argue that maybe there should be one statistical agency. And actually there's a really report that was put out called The Innovations in Federal Statistics, Combining Data Sources While Protecting Privacy, that was put out by the National Academies of Sciences, that actually was led by Bob Groves, Dean Provost Groves. And one of the recommendations that he has in this book that came out last year, 2017, says that maybe we should look into that. And we should be standardizing and not duplicating these queries, not duplicating. And so you have to make that balance between the privacy or the question of honesty. Because if you only get one question about your income, are you going to be talking about how much money you made or how much money you really made? So that's one of the things that that's going to have to be done. And actually, some of the stuff that's coming out by the federal and OMB suggestions right now, they are asking for less data collection by the federal government and more data purchasing on third party. And that's actually, to me, a little bit scary, but we'll see what happens with that. Let's hope that the professionals in the agencies will be protecting their jobs, but also, because there is a little bit of that. There is crossover, there is duplications, but there is also attrition. Because a lot of these statistical people are getting older, so therefore all of those jobs I pointed out are available, to you. Other questions? Yeah.
Oh, that was just kind of a comment. It can also be useful to have different surveys that look at the same things from different methodologies, because you can kind of use it as like a check on whether it's very good.
So you have a benchmark, and it's like, how out of whack is that? And that's one of the things I'm very familiar with the Census Bureau, that they have that for the economic census. They do it every 5 years, but in between there, they have surveys that are done. So after that 5 year, they don't do that survey, they do the census, and they say, how out of whack are our assumptions during that time period? Now, for business, that makes sense, but 10 years is a huge difference. And so all of these projections of population, all of these projections, you have to be really, really skilled. And hopefully, you're here at Georgetown and learning those skills, how to make projections before those benchmark studies are actually done. So that's another reason why you have these other surveys, to also double check to say how out of bounds or how out of whack are we. I went and talked to some people at the Federal Reserve here at the Governor's Board of Governors, and they said they use all of the open data sources, but they also contract for over 400 data sets a year from third parties to see what reality is going on out there. So they double check with a lot of that stuff. And to tell you the truth, one of my favorite, if you really want a large, very good, clean data sets, the BEA, the Bureau of Economic Analysis, cleans their data and scrubs their data, and they try to standardize everything because the CPI and the GDP and everything else, they're trying to harmonize all of those methodologies so that it can be done. So if you are looking for data sets that are more harmonized, try to use the BEA data sets if you're looking at the economy. And then some of these other agencies, some we're going to be talking about later, you could go into those agencies and some of them will say, this follows the same standards or methodologies as other studies, so that you know that you can harmonize or mesh those, put those data sets together. But very good questions.
I also have a question.
Yeah.
Well, even though in America there is no statistical agency, you still have chief statistician, and who's that person?
That's Nancy. The question was about even though we don't have a national statistical organization,
yes,
but we have a statistician, a chief statistician in the United States. She answers to OMB, and she looks at the funding. Hopefully, she's fighting Mick to say you need to give more money to these agencies so they can do their jobs.
Basically, she allocates the money to different companies.
That's Mick's job, but she works underneath Mick Maloney, the chief, the head of the OMB. So she advises the OMB, but she cannot override the OMB chief. So hopefully she's there as an advocate and is strongly encouraging him to fund as much as possible for statistical agencies.
Another question. Is there any specific law that regulates statistical agencies in the United States?
There are many, many different laws. And if you could on the sheet here is not a sign-up sheet. It's a sheet if you want to get a copy of the slides. And if you can mark on that sheet that you're interested, I could send you all the laws about the CFR laws, the Federal Register, the presidential memorandum. There's a lot of different ones, but are you interested in more of the congressional laws, or are you talking about regulations and presidential memorandum? All of them? Because these are just some of them, but I can send you, I do believe I remember seeing a website with all of those listed together, and actually at the end of this time, I'm going to also be talking about associations of the actual statistical agencies as well as the user of the data. So you can also go into those websites and explore a little bit more. Those people will know more than I do. Other questions for right now? Yes.
Kind of going off of the like projections problem, I guess. So I'm in the graduate journalism program, and one of the main problems that I find with data and looking at data and trying to incorporate it into my articles and things like that is the timing. So, like I just finished something where the only data that I could find and the only analytics that I could find were from 2015, 2016. And the whole point of journalism is that it's today, it's accurate today. So is there any way around that, or is it just I have to go out to the streets myself and ask people?
Well, you ask people if they're a statistician standing on the street, then it would be informed. But if it's just, me, you ask me, my opinion, not worth it. So as a journalist and you're doing the projections, you basically do the same thing that all journalists do, is that you call up the statistical agency and you don't ask, is there new data? Because they're by law, they can't say, oh yeah, we're holding it back and you can't see it. But the thing is, you can say who uses this data to make projections. Because you're going to ask an expert who is the best person who knows this. Usually it's associations, because they know the trends, they know what's going to be influencing. Is air traffic going to go up or down in 2017? What do you think? Well, some of us are very educated, and we say it'll probably decrease international travel because less international people are welcome in the United States. So the World Tourism Association would probably be able to give you, here's the numbers, and then if you notice a lot of graphs, they have ... as projections, and that's based upon an expert advice. So you get the data, you cite the data, and then in your report you say this, Jane Smith from the so-and-so association believes it goes up. What I would do is talk to the World Tourism Organization, but also talk to the international airlines and see what they believe, because they're looking at the trends a different way. They're looking at another data point, data access information. They know what tickets, how many tickets are purchased already. The World Tourism Organization is probably just grabbing the visa numbers that are coming in and doing projections. So I would use the federal government data to show a trend, and then to be able to project farther, go to an expert. And those are usually associations, because if you go to a consultant, they'll charge you. But an association is usually a lot more friendly.
So basically shortcut it being like, put the quote on the expert instead of me saying
Oh,
something.
yeah.
And that
Unless
way,
you're an expert in
that way
predicting
if I'm wrong,
statistics.
then,
Yeah,
it's not me that said it, it's this person that said it. So. okay.
right. As long as you have
I can
an
do that.
authoritative source, unless you're a statistical whiz and predictive analytics and stuff like that. And we don't teach that yet here, do we? I don't know, predictive analytics.
Machine learning classes.
In the machine, that's right, that's true, we're doing machine learning. Prickly subject. Any other questions? Excellent. I love this. I was so afraid that people would want to get right to the data, that it'll be useless. Now this actually has a lot of links. This side of the presentation has a lot of links. And every one of these links are accurate. I tested them out last month or 2 weeks ago. So if they're not working now, let me know when you get it sent. But I'm a business librarian. You want to do an industry analysis. You can actually do an industry analysis just looking at data. If there's the political, social, cultural, economic, and technology, by using all of these open data sources, you can create a pest analysis. Are the trends going up or down? How is this being bounced? And you can get data, evidence-based for all of these. Remember, evidence-based is that data. It's not really the analysis. Is it going up or down? You have to read that data. You have to interpret that data. I could spend a whole hour just on this one slide, but you're not business people. Nobody from business is here. So I won't. There are 13 major statistical agencies out there. And these 13 are actually, I used NOMB, and they say these are the funding, these are the organizations. These 13 companies industries or departments make up the council of interagency statistical council, or whatever the name is depending upon the administration. Actually, the interagency statistical council, I just found out today, is no longer active. And there's a lot of things I found out today that made this today interesting. But all of these still exist. All of these people do produce data. So depending upon your industry that you're interested in, you could go to all of these. Now, for somebody who is in women's and family studies and stuff like that, it's going to be a combination of census, labor, federal spending, Social Security, so it's kind of going to be all over. But from a lot of you, it sounded like you have a focus in on some of these organizations. And I'm going to show you how to actually use an index to use this to get into it. But if you know it's an education question, if you know it's a labor question, you can use these links to go right into it. The federal government is very interested in science as well as is social science. So if you're interested in agriculture, very big on family budgets and financing and stuff like that. Agriculture has that. Health, energy, environment, land management, and science and engineering. Science and engineering, it sounds like, one thing, but, there's so many different kinds. So just be aware that these are agencies that or themes that you will find easy statistical information for. There are some programs that are not a part of these that you could also find using some of the particularly I'm going to be going into data.gov to be able to read. But these are, and I'm going to ask you also, hopefully, what is your favorite agency or table? You know, probably in a week from now, remind me, Holly, in about a week to contact these people, and I'm going to start crossing out this list. You know, what did you find? What table or agency did you like that you found, or that you still, you're not just after today, but you know of? Because I'm always looking at building my collection. One of the questions you asked is also, is it, you know, what about states? States have this open data, and actually I have seen more data visualization on state data than I have on federal data. And there's really a lot of innovative way of presenting information on using state data. One of my favorite ones, California has some really good stuff, but New York City, you can actually find how many rats per square foot there are in the city. I mean, if you really wanted to.
I don't know.
The DC is actually working on to actually putting a monitor. You've heard about the Internet of Things? They're talking about putting monitors in all of the public trash cans to say, when is it full? Is it wet or light trash? So they know what kind of a trash container or collection they have to do, and then using that time wisely. So there's a lot of using big data, particularly in visualization, and if you are a sanitation engineer, getting that data set will allow you to model different ways of getting it. So even though they designed it for saying, when do we send out the trash people to get, you know, to empty that trash can, what you could do is get that data and start using modeling examples. And so you can start using that data. Remember, the one thing about open data, especially government data, is it's usually collected for another purpose than what you really want it for. So don't be surprised if you say, oh, I need this data for this. Go to somebody who says they have this data and look at the code book. Look at the variables. Look to say, can I get this data and use it? Cut and paste this URL. Instead of saying your state here, put in Iowa or you know, Maryland. So just take that search string and plug it in Google, and you will get some really cool things, especially if you're geographically specific. Let's talk about international data. We've been talking an awful lot about US federal data, but I want you to know that countries around the world aren't as rich as the United States. No. Who knew? And so a lot of organizations are actually looking at making data available to everybody. That this data is collected usually at the country level and usually not sub-country, so you can only get country-related data. But you can get data about energy, about gender studies, gas house. I mean, you know, all of this statistical data is out there, and we're going to actually go in and do a demo of this data set. But data.un.org is not just about UN data, but they index the OECD data, they index the World Table, the World Bank table, the International Financial Statistics table, or International Monetary Fund data, and a lot of other agencies, or excuse me, NGOs out there. And don't forget, the United States is a country. So one of the comparisons you could do, if you're saying, I need to know what are the trends in the United States on this subject, but no federal agency collects it this way, go to a UN agency and look at the United States numbers, because they usually have statistical data. Now, statistics weren't that hot until I would say probably Maynard Keynes, where he says it has to be more evidence-based. It can't just be theory. We can't just say capitalist and communist. We have to go deeper into that. And so realize that a lot of statistics are not out there before 1950s, 1960s. 1970s, we started seeing more statistical analysis and more federal agencies using evidence-based. And so therefore you see some of that data starting in the 70s. So just be aware of that. There is some data that go back farther than World War II, but not as much. The statistical collection is going up like that. So talk to a librarian if you're doing a historical analysis and you need something older than the 1970s and you're not finding it. Sometimes you just need somebody to say, to confirm it's not there. And being able to say it's not there means you have to find an expert who knows it, and that's one of the things that librarians can do for you. Just realize that the World Health Organization, the International Labor Organization, all of these agencies have specific things that they look at. So if you want to be really particular, you can go straight to the source or just use UN data. If you are looking at anything subnational, at the state level, at the regional levels within a nation, you have to go to the national statistical offices. Heads up. They're not going to put things in English when they have money issues. It's going to be national language. Sometimes you can get an English translation, but even if they offer English on the National Statistical Office, it's not going to be as much as if you had it at the national language. Numbers, actually, I don't know of any culture that does not use Roman numbers or Arabic numbers. Actually, numbers actually generated from the Arabic culture. So that you can look at the numbers and you just have to translate the headers of the columns and tables. Don't be intimidated. Go into Google Translate and find out what are women called in Sri Lanka, and just search that word. Cut and paste, even if it has diacritics, cut and paste it in that national countries office, and you'll get data, and you'll start saying, well, does that make sense? And you'll translate some other things. So for international, there's sometimes the historical, statistical, or the national statistical offices are the repositories of these data sets and archives, but most of the time, they only have so much room, they only have so much time, they only have so much expertise of collecting the data. But sometimes that data has to be found in a repository or an archive, which is usually done at a university or the National Library. So if you're looking at historical data for international countries, and also for the United States, a lot of times, you find out who has the archives of it, but the people who collected it may not have the archive. Just a heads up. So one of the things I really encourage you to do is talk to the people who collect it and ask, where is your archive? Where is this? How far back did you collect it? So you know that, was there an archive, or was this just started 30 years ago? Or, and they will know where the data is. But in the United States, actually, a lot of the older data is ending up in the National Archives and Records Administration. Is that what it is? NARA. NARA. And so you can get that data historically. And that's actually found in one place. There's 2 NARA buildings in the Washington, D.C. area. And some of it's born digital. There's issues there. If you want to talk about NARA and historical government data, that's a whole nother discussion. But let's have a little bit of fun. Let's go look at, do you guys want to do international or US data?
US.
Okay. So data.gov is one of my favorite sources to go to for US federal data. There used to be something until this weekend called FedStats. If you heard of that, forget it. It doesn't exist anymore at all. And I spent about 3 hours today confirming that. Yeah, how do you confirm a negative, right? How do you know it's just not lost or somebody turned on the wrong website? No, it's no longer available. So go to, one of my favorite places is data.gov and search. Now, you can do the old-fashioned way of just trying to guess what is this about, but let's just put in our search term. The person who came in late, what kind of research data are you looking for? Or that you would like to use as an example?
Well, my interest in data happens to do with fashion. So
With what?
fashion.
Fashion.
So I guess something
Textiles?
spending, consumer maybe.
Okay.
A good one.
Consumer expenditure reports on merchandise. There's trade when we're talking about this. So if we just type in, okay, when searching government data, you always have to say, what would my grandmother call this? The federal government uses the same terminology that was created back in the 70s. Remember, I told you a lot of things didn't start till the 70s. They wouldn't use the word fashion, but textiles or clothing. It wouldn't, you know, so textiles is actually raw. Let's type in clothing. Clothing. Did I spell that right?
Yes.
Okay. I usually have students up here. So we have 78 data sets on clothing. Oh my God. Clothing system design labs. Did you know that the federal laboratory actually does this for protective gear? But I believe, who does it? There is a statistical agency out there that every 3 years measures what is from the what is, this isn't the ankle, this is the wrist to the elbow. What is the size of your rump? How big, how much weight? There is a statistical agency that is measuring that and monitoring that every day. Because if you're flying an airplane, what is the average rump size, right? If you have to say how much should, you know, if you have to bid for military clothing, what is the average man between the age of 18? What is his dimensions like? Because statistical procurement sometimes has to be very specific. But I can't remember, there's a statistical agency, because I had a question like this 5 years ago, that said, can I find out what the average size of a woman's bust is? So, it's out there.
Anthropomorphic office.
I shouldn't be using that example. Socks, shoe size, it should shoe size, so we can find that out. So notice that we have up here, they doing it by relevancy, so hopefully they don't know what you were doing, but the last person on this computer, they believe that this is what they want. The nice thing is, oh, there's no mouse, is that you say, okay, are we talking about what kind of category or where is this going to be from? So let's bring this down. And so do we want to talk about energy and clothing? Do we want to talk about utilities and housing, social behavior? There's also the ability to look at this from the federal government or county government, state government. What organization do you believe this will be coming from? Who's actually publishing this? Let's say the Department of Commerce. Department of Commerce does many different things. So the average, the retail monthly sales. And so let's go in and, is any of these things interesting to you? You want to do monthly retail? You have to tell me or I'm going to make your decision up for you.
I mean, they all sound pretty interesting.
Pretty not really on dot, but you have to kind of explore and see it. Notice that we could go to the webpage to get it. This is a direction. This is not where the data is based, but it's a direction where to find the database. If you notice, we have what's called facets or filters or subject headings, depending upon how old you are. So we could use all of those to get to what I want to get into. And then here's the subject headings that they use. So without even going into the website yet, we could look at the subject headings or the tags and say, what is this going to be like and what do they have? And notice the also thing is they also give you who is actually creator of this data. So if you want to say, you know, you have all these questions about it, you can actually go in and find that. So you could go visit the website, and then you get into the database that actually generated from census and say what the retail sales, are we interested in the taxes, inventory, operating expense, margins, accounts receivables. You never knew that clothing actually touches on all of these. So you could go in and say, how much money is being spent on blouses versus t-shirts? And so that's one of the ways that you can maybe use this data for fashion. So data.gov is a great place to go to get started, to really explore the getting into there. And then it could get you to an Excel spreadsheet. Sometimes it actually puts you into an API. And you may say, what the heck's an API? We're going to just cover that a little bit because I want to respect your time. We started 3 minutes late, so I'm going to take 3 extra minutes. Is that all right with everybody? Or I could just write it right now. Okay. The problems you'll come with open data, and I've constantly harangued on these, or not harangued, I have mentioned them, that this is data that actually was created not for your purpose, but for the purpose of the agency and for decision making. So sometimes it is too old. Sometimes it doesn't at the geographic level. Sometimes it no longer exists because of funding. That's I had a great story I could tell you about that. But sometimes the data, what you want, does exist, but it's not publicly available. There's Freedom of Information Act, especially for journalists. If you know this data was collected, if you know there was a study out there and you can't find any references to it, or if it's not available out there on the web, you can do a Freedom of Information Act. It takes actually it's a lot better than it used to be. I don't know what it is. Under the previous administration, this administration hopefully will be just as fast. It's all automated now, and it's faster. It used to be sometimes up to a year before you got things back, but I've heard the average is now like 4 weeks to get data back. You may have problems with licensing, and then you also talked about the methodology, that combining these, the methodologies may not be the same, so you might have a problem doing that. Or the data sets were just off so much that you can't make an assumption by doing an analysis. I really do believe if you want a job in the future about data, to look at APIs, which stands for Application Programming Interface. This is basically taking that data, big data sets, and putting it in so you can do visualizations. If you're talking about business intelligence, or if you're talking about analytics or anything like that, this is going to probably be done with an API. And data.gov will tell you, are there APIs available for this data, so you could just download it into SAS or into ARD or into SPSS, and so that you could take this data set and do your analysis on it. There are open data, open education. We know about open education and some of the things that are there. There are organizations that give you training on so many things. The ICSPR data, we actually have a subscription to that here at the Georgetown University, but it's actually not held by the library, but any librarians will be able to help you, right? Yep. Any librarian will be able to help you with the ISPR data. If you want to talk about policies, there's the Professional Association of Federal Statistics, and then the public data users, which is basically, these are also government employees, but these are the people who collect the numbers, these are the people who use the numbers. So when I said you can look at these groups, we'll talk about, they're tracking the politics closer than I am. But there's also the American Statistical Association and the Open Data Project, which is a little bit lighter. If you want to know more about the legal issues, and I didn't hear many people asking about legal issues, there are places where you can go more about that. My 2 favorite nonprofits that are following this, following these issues, is the Sunlight Foundation, my favorite source. My second favorite right now is Federal Government Open Data, Center for Data Innovation. This is where you're going to get some of the statistics, some of the information about what's going on. If you want to know about open data, if you want to know about the knowledge, the KDY thing, this is really cool. Has anybody seen the YouTube video about animation, about I need to find your data? Oh, when you get this, open this up because it is hilarious. It's scientific data. And it's like, I need to get your data set. Yeah. The 2 bears. It's really fun to look at. this is my contact information. I tweet probably once a week, depending upon if I'm awake or not. My email, contact me. My phone number, if I'm sitting at my desk, which is about 50% of the time, I will answer my phone, but I'm terrible at returning phone calls. So if I don't answer the phone, send me an email. And then please, I'm gonna ask, what are your favorite open data websites and sources? Hopefully, when you get the slides, which I will put out probably tomorrow, because I have to drive someone home to Greenville tonight. I will send these out tomorrow or Friday, because, yeah, probably tomorrow. The slides out deck to y'all. And just go in and explore and everything else. So I'm here, I basically am gonna drive this guy in 15 minutes, so I can answer questions for 15 minutes. You guys are still sitting with me, thank you. Kind of one year ago, isn't it? So just me. So I'm gonna stop recording, and some of you were too shy and didn't wanna let other people know you were here. Stop